CJ Fly back with another YouTube video. Today going over what I believe are the best teams to rebuild in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode. Now I'm going to break this down into three separate tiers. First, there's going to be the teams for long-term rebuilds. Teams in this tier, of course, consisting of younger players, older veterans, teams that are not looking to contend anytime within the next at least 1 to 2 seasons, if not 5 years or more. Then we have the next tier, which is the mid-term rebuilds. These teams have made playoff runs before, some of them have even made it to the finals in recent years, but they're not quite contenders for the upcoming season, and might need at least 1 if not 2 years of rebuilding before making a finals run once again. And then we have the quick rebuild tier. These are teams that some people may consider to be contenders already, while some of the other teams in this tier may not be contenders yet, but perhaps they're only 1 or 2 moves away and could get there within 1 to 2 seasons pretty easily. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the long-term rebuilds. For my honorable mention, I have none other than the Charlotte Hornets. The Hornets, of course, have LaMelo Ball as their star player, and he is under contract for the next 4 years. And then there's some other younger players on the roster. Some of them I think you can make the case for having a bigger role on a contending team, such as Miles Bridges and Colin Sexton. And then there's players like Josh Green and Grant Williams that may have already hit their ceiling. The Hornets also have their 2026 first-round pick going into next year's draft, as well as having 2 unprotected first-round picks and 1 lottery-protected first-round pick in the 2027 draft. That includes their own pick, 1 pick from the Mavericks, which is unprotected, and the lottery-protected pick is from the Heat. And honestly, depending on how the Mavericks go through this season regarding their injuries and whatnot, that could be a decent pick for the Hornets. By the 2026-2027 NBA season, Kyrie and AD are a couple years older. Granted, they do have Cooper Flag, but you just never know at that point. So this is why I have the Hornets as my honorable mention. They have a good star in LaMelo Ball. They've got some flexibility with the roster, with a lot of their younger guys only having 1 or 2 years left on their contracts. And then they have some draft picks to work with over the next couple years. The 5th best team to do a long-term rebuild for would be none other than the Washington Wizards. Now, what I really like about the Wizards roster is they have multiple rotation players that are ranging in the ages of 19 to 21. They're incredibly young, have a ton of potential to grow. On top of that, you have a couple of NBA veterans who have made it far in the playoffs before. Chris Middleton, who's an NBA champion, previously at the Milwaukee Bucks. And then, of course, you have CJ McCollum, previously with the Portland Trail Blazers, making it to the conference finals. And the best part is they both only have 1 year left on their contracts, ranging around 30 to 33 million for the last year. And with both of them being 34 years old, it's very unlikely that they would re-sign for that much money in future seasons if you did want to keep them. Regarding the younger players on the roster, of course, the most popular is Alex Sarr. And with him and many of these other young players being on rookie contracts, you just have a ton of flexibility financially with this roster as far as construction goes over the next couple seasons. In addition to that, the Wizards do have their 2026 and their 2027 first-round picks. So overall, a very solid option if you're looking for a long-term rebuild. The 4th best team for a long-term rebuild in NBA 2K26 MyNBA is none other than the Portland Trail Blazers. Now this one might be controversial to some of you, but hear me out. At the time of recording this video on August 28th, 2025, the Trailblazers are in the middle of a rebuild themselves. They've just gotten started. They're bringing back the hometown hero in Damian Lillard. They gave up on Anthony Simons, trading him away and bringing in the veteran Drew Holiday. And they also let go of DeAndre Ayton. This team is clearly reworking itself, rebuilding the roster, and I don't think they're quite done yet. Which of course makes them the perfect team to continue that rebuild with in MyNBA. Now like I said, this is a long-term rebuild. Drew Holiday is still under contract for another couple years, same with Jeremy Grant. Dame of course is on a very team-friendly contract. And then you have some expiring contracts like Robert Williams and Matisse Thybulle, who are decent players and could be pieces on a contending team. Both of them being 28 years old, you could definitely look to trade them before the deadline for some draft picks or some younger players. And speaking of draft picks, the Trailblazers do not have a first round pick in 2026. However, Portland will have a couple of draft picks from the first round between 2027 and 2028, including an unprotected first round pick from the Orlando Magic in 2028. So the challenge with the Trailblazers would be, could you get Damian Lillard a championship ring before he retires from the league? The third best team to do a long-term rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA is none other than the Utah Jazz. The Jazz, of course, have Lauri Markkanen as their best player, and he is under contract for the next several years, all the way through the end of the 2028 to 2029 NBA regular season. They, of course, also just drafted Ace Bailey with the 5th pick in the 2025 NBA draft. And then they have this random assortment of players, some of them veterans, some of them younger players, most of them younger players, really. But you have Yusuf Nurkic at center. You've got Kyle Anderson at the power forward as some of those older veteran players. And then, of course, you have Walker Kessler at center, 24 years old. You've got brother of Jalen Williams, Cody Williams, on his rookie contract. And the biggest piece that this team is missing is, of course, a true point guard to lead the roster. Something that might be able to get done with the draft picks, whether it's trading a bunch of picks in a package for a good point guard, or it's drafting a good point guard of the future. The Jazz have their 2026 first round pick. They have the Lakers' 2027 first round pick, as well as their own 2027 first round pick. And then there's a few other first round pick swaps mixed in there over the next couple seasons. So the Jazz have plenty of opportunities to either keep building up their roster with younger players, or trade away some of those picks in a package for a star or decent contributor. And outside of Lauri Markkanen, the payroll on this team is not too bad, so there's definitely some financial flexibility there. The second best team to rebuild in NBA 2K26 MyNBA for a long-term rebuild is none other than the Chicago Bulls, who have a ton of expiring contracts on their roster going into this upcoming season. I'm talking Nikola Vucevic, I'm talking about Zach Collins, I'm talking about Kevin Huerter, I'm talking about Kobe White. There is no shortage of expiring contracts on this roster going into 2025 to 2026. In addition to that, they also have other players on this roster that could easily be trade pieces, players going to a contending team. I'm talking Patrick Williams, I'm talking Isaac Okoro. You just never know what's going to pop up on the trade block leading to the deadline. And as far as draft picks go, the Bulls own their own first round pick for the next several years. They also have a lottery protected pick from the Trailblazers going into next year's 2026 NBA draft. And let's not forget last year's first round draft pick by the Bulls, Buzelis. So they got some decent young guys. They got some financial flexibility going into the next couple seasons on this roster. And the team has their own draft picks. As far as long-term rebuilds go, it doesn't really get much better than that. But that being said, I still don't have the Bulls as the best team for a long-term rebuild in NBA 2K26 MyNBA. The team that gets that honor is none other than the Brooklyn Nets. They have the most amount of cap space in the league as of today, making this video. They currently have Michael Porter Jr. as their highest paid player. They just traded away Cam Johnson to get him to Brooklyn. They also have Nick Claxton under contract for the next 3 years, as well as Terrence Mann for the next 3 years. And then I have to be honest, just looking up and down this roster, I don't recognize a lot of these names. I've seen Haywood Highsmith before, but outside of that, I don't recognize a lot of these players. Now, as far as draft picks go, the Nets have accumulated a ton of draft capital over the past couple years, trading away some of the most profound players in the league. That, of course, including Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Mikal Bridges. So not a ton of draft picks going into 2026. They only have their own draft pick, but in 2027, they have the Knicks first round pick, the lesser of the Nets and the Rockets pick, and a top 10 protected Sixers pick. And then in 2028, they have the best of either the Suns or Wizards pick and the best of either the Nets or Knicks pick. And then you go into 2029, they have their own pick and the Knicks pick and another pick swap. It just keeps going and going. They have a ton of picks to work with, not quite as much as what Sam Presti has with the Oklahoma City Thunder, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. Speaking of the Oklahoma City Thunder, I do want to put out the disclaimer there now after we've done all these long-term rebuild teams. The Thunder's not on this list. They're not on the midterm rebuild list. and they're not on the quick rebuild list. Now you might be asking yourself, why would I not put the Thunder on any of these three lists? They have a ton of draft capital, the most in the league by far. Sam Presti, the absolute insane genius that he is, acquiring all these picks and bringing this team a championship caliber roster, winning their first ever NBA title last season. Why are they not on the list? And I would argue because they don't really need a rebuild. They are who they are at this point. They don't need to make any changes. They're a championship team, and they've got enough draft capital for the next few years to continue building up in case one of the guys falls down with an injury or regresses or what have you, So I don't really see them as a team needing to be rebuilt, which is why they're not on any of the three-tiered lists. Now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the midterm rebuild list. For my honorable mention, I have none other than the Detroit Pistons. Now again, teams on the mid-tier list, I see them as teams that already have at least one star player, and they're going to be a couple seasons away from contending for a championship. Assuming, of course, you make the right moves. So, the Pistons have Cade Cunningham locked down for the next 5 seasons, and in addition to him, you've got some other quality young talent on this roster. You've got Jaden Ivey, you've got Asar Thompson, you got Ron Holland, you got Jalen Duren, you got Isaiah Stewart, and they're at least going to be a low playoff seed this year, more than likely, because they've also put in some veteran shooters on this team and some easy contributors for the playoffs. You got Duncan Robinson. He's got a history of knocking down some threes in this league. You got Tobias Harris. You got Karis LeVert, who can score the ball. They're just not quite there yet as far as contending for a championship. And as far as financial flexibility goes, they do have a little bit of wiggle room. They're going to be off that Tobias Harris contract after the end of this season. And then some of those younger players I mentioned before are still on their rookie contracts. However, a couple of those rookie contracts do expire at the end of this season, and then they will be restricted free agent going into the offseason next year. And that's why the Pistons, I have them as an honorable mention. They got some flexibility, not a lot. The timeline as far as the rookie, former rookie players goes and, where the rookie contracts are at, and as well as the draft picks that the Pistons own. They really only have their own picks as far as first round picks go for the next 4 to 5 years. They don't own anyone else's picks. Moving on to the 5th best team to do a midterm rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode, I have the Memphis Grizzlies. The Grizzlies, of course, with their star player Ja Morant on contract for the next 3 seasons, and then their second best player, Jaren Jackson Jr., the defensive menace, locked in for the next 4 years with an additional year on a player option. And then they recently traded away Desmond Bane, bringing in Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who is a veteran guard that provides some defense and some outside shooting. And then you got Zach Edey, the young center, still on a rookie contract for the next few years. And how could I forget Ty Jerome? He was a huge contributor off the bench for the Cleveland Cavaliers during their huge regular season last year. He's now on the Grizzlies for less than $10 million per year for the next couple years. In addition to all the players I've mentioned, you've got some other young players on this roster as well, like Jalen Wells and G.G. Jackson. And then as far as draft picks goes, the Grizzlies have some good draft picks. They have the Phoenix Suns 2026 first round pick, which ought to be pretty decent, if not a lottery pick. I mean, it's got to be up there. The West is loaded. There's no way that the Suns are going to be making the playoffs in my mind. They also have their own first round pick for the next several years, in addition to a 2029 first round pick from the Orlando Magic. So you have a great pairing in Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. Of course, you could look to trade either one of them if you don't like them for the fit of the team. You've got some good young players. You got some good role players on some good contracts like Ty Jerome and Brandon Clark. And then you got some decent short-term draft capital. Moving on to the 4th best team to do a midterm rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode, I have none other than the Golden State Warriors, which I know might be surprising to some people. Because as far as draft picks go, they really only have their own first round picks for the next few years. They do have some financial flexibility, but they're currently in this weird phase right now where they've got Jonathan Kuminga. Is this going to be like a sign and trade situation? What's going on here with him? You got Steph Curry locked in for the next couple years. He's already 37 years old. You got Jimmy Butler locked in for more than $50 million per year the next couple years. He's 36. You got Draymond Green for a 1+1. He's 35. And then besides all of them, you got Buddy Hield, who's on a pretty good contract, 33 years old, getting paid about $10 million per year the next couple years. And after that, it's a bunch of guys in their low to mid 20s. So the reason I have the Warriors as a mid-term rebuild is because they obviously have some star power here to make a last-minute run before these guys retire. They just don't have the supporting pieces per se. So I suppose you could make the argument that this is more of a quick rebuild rather than a mid-term rebuild type of team. However, the fact that they still have all of their first-round picks, and I would argue that Jimmy Butler and Draymond Green are tradable contracts in addition to some of these support guys that they still have. Buddy Hield, of course, is a contract with great value. And it would just be fun to play with Steph Curry and try to get him one more championship before he retires. Now the third best team for a midterm rebuild in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode, I've got none other than the Milwaukee Bucks. They of course are in a very tricky situation right now, having just waived Damian Lillard and are on the books with dead cap for the next few years, $20 million per year. It's almost as if they have a star player of sorts, not really a star player, but more of just like a high-end role player on their roster, but they actually don't. They're just stuck paying the $20+ million per year for the next 4 to 5 seasons. In addition to the dead cap, they do of course have Giannis under contract for the next 2 seasons with a player option added on top of that. They just signed Miles Turner to a 3+1 deal. They got Kyle Kuzma for the next couple years. They got Bobby Portis for at least the next couple years. And then after that, this team, the prospects are not looking good. I'm not too optimistic of this roster. You got Kevin Porter Jr., you got Ryan Rollins, you got Gary Trent Jr., Gary Harris, Taurean Prince. The rest of this roster does not exactly scream championship contention. And the worst part is the Bucks don't actually own their own first-round pick until the year 2030. In 26 and 28, they have pick swaps with the Pelicans and the Trailblazers, getting the worst of the 2 picks in those swaps. However, of course, you got Giannis Antetokounmpo, so you have the option of either trading him for a huge package or trying to keep him and Miles Turner and just cleaning house with the rest of the roster, bringing in a new supporting cast, potentially with some younger players that are getting paid less or some unproven players, instead of guys like 31-year-old Gary Harris and 31-year-old Taurean Prince. Now the second best team to do a midterm rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode is none other than the Philadelphia 76ers. Now I just want to make it clear that this is for the purposes of 2K. I would not recommend trying to run this 76ers organization in real life. They are in a very tricky situation with Paul George under contract, $50+ million per year for the next 2 to 3 years. On top of that, it just doesn't seem like Embiid can play a full season healthy anymore at this point in his career at 31 years old. But there is still some hope from the future. You got Jared McCain, who is the bright light in a world of darkness for Sixers fans. Still on his rookie contract, of course. He just completed his first year in the league last season. The Sixers just drafted VJ Edgecombe from Baylor. And although the Sixers don't have many draft picks, I do have to point out they own the 2028 Clippers first round pick, which is, dare I say, a bit enticing. Because at that point, Harden and Kawhi might be looking at retiring soon. They might not be considered elite or above average players anymore at that point. And the Sixers also have a pick swap with the Clippers in 2029, getting the best of those 2 picks. So again, there's 2 approaches you could take with this team. This is a team that in the 2K realm, you could probably compete for a championship within 1 to 2 seasons, given that you already have Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and Paul George on this roster. But at the same time, they're also built for long-term success, having young guys like VJ Edgecombe and Jared McCain, as well as having a couple of enticing draft picks in a couple seasons. Now, despite all those factors, they are not the best team for a midterm rebuild in NBA 2K26 MyNBA. The best team for a midterm rebuild in NBA 2K26 MyNBA would be the Indiana Pacers. They, of course, just lost Game 7 in the NBA Finals against the Oklahoma City Thunder a couple months ago, and their star player in Tyrese Haliburton is going to be out for the whole season with a torn Achilles tendon. They also lost their starting center Miles Turner to the Milwaukee Bucks in the offseason. But despite all of that, there is still hope for this team if they can do things properly. You've got Pascal Siakam, 31 years old, under contract for the next 3 seasons. Tyrese Haliburton, although an Achilles injury is not the best, he's still only 25 years old and he can bounce back once he recovers. And then you have some quality role players under contract for at least the next 2 to 3 seasons, including Andrew Nembhard, Obi Toppin, Aaron Nesmith, and TJ McConnell. The main piece this team is missing is a true center now that they've lost Miles Turner. And the Pacers do have their own first-round pick for the next several years. So you could easily blow this team up and still get some good pieces back to put together a championship roster within the next 1 to 2 seasons. Or you could write it out with Siakam and Tyrese Haliburton, try to draft some good talent, perhaps sign a center in the offseason, and work your way back to the NBA Finals. Now on to the quick rebuild tier, the final tier of rebuilds for NBA 2K26 MyNBA. The honorable mention I have is none other than the Houston Rockets. The Rockets, of course, just traded away Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks for Kevin Durant, who is on an expiring contract going into next season. I know some of you may argue that the Rockets don't really need to do anything else at this point in order to contend for a championship. They are who they are, they have who they have. But not so fast. I would make the argument that you could trade away a few pieces and try to build up certain positions before just writing it out with the roster as it exists today. I'm talking guys like Fred VanVleet. Perhaps you could see what the trade market is like for Jabari Smith Jr. if you're trying to win within 1 to 2 seasons. Perhaps you're looking to move on from Alperen Şengün now that you have veteran centers in Steven Adams and Clint Capella. There are some possibilities to make some adjustments to this roster to form them the way that you would like in an attempt to win an NBA championship within the next season. Now on to the 5th best team to do a quick 1 to 2 year rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA. That would be none other than the Cleveland Cavaliers, who in the offseason acquired Lonzo Ball. They of course had a tremendous regular season, followed by an absolute bust of a playoff run, didn't make it anywhere at all. Of course, having aspirations for the conference finals and beyond, didn't get anywhere close to that. So the question now is, what do the Cavaliers do next? They have Evan Mobley under contract for the next few years. They got their star Donovan Mitchell locked in for at least 2 seasons. They got Darius Garland, the starting point guard, who's been an all-star before, but some people may think it's time for the Cavs to move on and trade him. The Cavs also just traded for DeAndre Hunter to have as their starting small forward. They got Jarrett Allen, who is a great defensive presence on the floor at center. And then you got Max Strus from that 2023 Miami Heat Finals run. And of course, let's not forget Dean Wade. But again, one could make the argument that perhaps it's time for the Cavs to move on from Darius Garland. Perhaps having the pair of Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley on the floor at the same time is not beneficial and perhaps should stick with only one or the other as a starting center. There's a ton of different things that the Cavaliers could do here in order to put themselves in a position to win a championship within the upcoming season. The 4th best team to do a quick rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode is none other than the New York Knicks, who lost to the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals last season. Now, of course, the Knicks made some moves in the offseason, firing their head coach Tom Thibodeau, replacing him with Mike Brown, and then getting some decent role players off the bench, including the scorer Jordan Clarkson and Yabusele at forward. However, I think the argument could be made, especially in the 2K realm, that some changes still need to be made to this roster in order to truly compete for an NBA championship. First of all, this roster is not very deep at all. Beyond the starting lineup, you have maybe another 2 or 3 guys at most. And then after that, if there's any injuries, you really cannot fully rely on the 9th or 10th player and beyond on this roster in a playoff setting. That being said, of course, they have some great starters. They got Towns, they got OG Anunoby, they got Jalen Brunson, they got Mikal Bridges. I mean, they got a ton of guys that can come in, contribute right away, score 20 plus points per night if needed. The weak link, unfortunately, in my mind, as far as NBA 2K goes, is Josh Hart, because in real life, he is a 6'4" guy that's able to out-rebound 7-foot players. But in 2K, That's not necessarily the case. At least from what I've seen, it doesn't fully replicate what we've seen from Josh Hart in real life. And so with that, my suggestion, of course, would be to look for a trade partner to get him off the roster for another contributor, whether it's a forward or a guard off the bench. And then, of course, you have the injury-prone Mitchell Robinson at center. He's on an expiring contract, so keep him, don't keep him, that's the question there. But really, the Knicks are probably only 1 or 2 moves away, in my mind, from being a true championship contender if you don't think they're already there. Now, the third best team to do a quick rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode is none other than the Boston Celtics, who were the 2024 NBA champions, but recently have had a bit of issue with their roster. First of all, you got Jason Tatum, who's out with the Achilles tear after the playoffs injury occurrence. The Celtics ended up moving on from Kristaps Porzingis. And then it looks like Al Horford is planning to make his departure, possibly for the Golden State Warriors, which leaves the Celtics with pretty much no depth at the center position. And then, of course, without their best player in Jason Tatum for the upcoming season, the finals hopes are just not very high. And how could I forget to mention Drew Holiday, who just got traded to the Portland Trail Blazers for Anthony Simons. Now, I don't know about anyone else. Trailblazers fans can speak up in the comments if they'd like, but I don't really see Anthony Simons as a starting guard on a championship team at his current playing ability. The most concerning part, of course, is the drop-off in defense from Drew Holiday to Anthony Simons. But with all that in consideration, the Celtics still have a great roster that could easily be a championship contender once Jason Tatum comes back from his injury. At the minimum, it's going to require the Celtics getting a quality center into their starting lineup. And perhaps the move to get it done could be trading Jaylen Brown. But again, that is a suggestion, and that is why I've got them as my third best team for a quick rebuild in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode. Now, the second best team to do a quick rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode, and this one I am sure is going to be controversial, is none other than the Dallas Mavericks. Yes, you heard that right. I have the Dallas Mavericks listed as a quick rebuild team. Now, why in the world would I have them there? Well, first you have to consider the timeline with Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving. Kyrie is out with a torn ACL right now. He will probably make it back midway to the end of this upcoming season. But the window as far as their playing ability as elite players, it's very limited. Maybe another couple seasons at most. But besides that, the Dallas Mavericks, they have a very deep roster as far as 2K goes. Not only do they have AD and Kyrie, but you have an aging Klay Thompson. You've got Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively who can swap out for each other at the center position. And they've got some solid defensive ratings in 2K. You've got PJ Washington at 27 years old, who's arguably a starting caliber forward, but is likely going to lose that starting spot to Cooper Flagg. PJ, of course, eligible for an extension in real life, and should also be eligible for that extension in MyNBA mode. And then you've also got some young quality guard talent in Max Christie and Jaden Hardy. Najee Marshall's a key contributor off the bench. And then you've got D'Lo, who can sometimes get you 20 points in a given night. So the way I look at this team is they're so deep at this point with their roster that you could trade away 2 or 3 of these players for another quality rotation player for the playoffs and potentially compete for a championship within the next 1 to 2 seasons before AD and Kyrie begin to regress too much. Now, the best team for a quick rebuild in an NBA 2K26 MyNBA mode, and yes, you've guessed it, especially you may have been thinking about it after the last team we talked about, I've got none other than the Los Angeles Lakers, who have the former Dallas Maverick in Luka Doncic. Now, of course, I have the Lakers listed as a quick rebuild because they have none other than LeBron James on the roster, and he is so close to retirement that every time you start a new MyNBA file, LeBron's already talking about going on his farewell tour, talking about retiring, and you have the option to agree or disagree with that, to force him to play one more season or to let him retire. So you already know he's about to be on his way out the door. You, of course, got Luka Doncic locked down for the next few seasons after signing that extension. And then you've got an interesting situation where Austin Reeves has been brought up before as a potential trade piece, but nothing's really come of it. You got Rui Hachimura, who's an expiring contract and is a solid contributor contributor as a defensive forward. You've also got guys like Gabe Vincent and Maxi Kleber who are on expiring contracts as well. You've got Marcus Smart who recently joined the team. He's going to be a great defensive contributor off the bench. And then you've got the young shooter Dalton Connect with a ton of potential who was almost traded once already last season for Mark Williams. But of course that trade ended up getting reverted. He's still on the roster. And he's someone that could easily be a trade piece in 2K, or someone that you keep and develop into a solid shooter that Luka can pass out to from time to time. So again, I've got the Lakers as a quick rebuild because of the timeline with LeBron James. But then of course you also have Luka Doncic on this team. You got some solid pieces, you got some guys that you could look to trade, and it might only take 1 or 2 moves to truly make this team a championship contending roster this season. Let me know what you think about this list of teams in the comments section down below. Which teams are you planning to do a rebuild with in NBA 2K26 MyNBA? And click one of the videos on your screen now for some more NBA 2K26 content.